So obviously we're in this book called The Story, and it's highlighting I don't want to say the important details of the Bible, but it's given us a 1,000-foot view, we'll call it, of the Bible, of these simple stories that maybe we've grown up reading about, we've heard in Sunday school, and my hope is that as you read through the story, that it kind of, it starts to move inside of you, that something starts to stir up, and you're like, man, I want to know more about that. And that you dive not only into, obviously, what we're reading in the chapter of the story, but that you then research and you kind of look at, okay, where in the actual Bible is it? And today, if you read the chapters, who can tell me what we're talking about? You guys read last week, just kidding. Everybody's like, look at me weird. It's all right. Today is the story of Joesph, and you may have heard, obviously there's the play Joesph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat and all this beautiful stuff. And the story of Joesph and the sibling rivalry that is there. And I know for my boys, we talked a little bit last week of how they fight, they argue, they love each other, they hate each other. And some of you are like, my kids are perfect. They never do that. Hey, I wish you the best then, because it's coming. And but for us in our house, I laugh sometimes because they will argue over some of the stupidest things. Yes, I did just say that in church. The dumbest things. Like, hey, who was the last one up the stairs that didn't turn off the light? Well, it wasn't me. It couldn't possibly be me. I'm like, oh. Who was the last one to come inside the door that didn't shut the door? That is one of my pet peeves, by the way, in my house. People not shutting doors. Drives me nuts. Whose turn is it to walk the dog or take the dog out? Whose turn is it for this? Or, that's my water bottle. It's a disposable water bottle. You can throw it away. Well, that's my penny. It's a penny. Right? Like, there's things that we fight about. And the arguing that goes on. And it's funny because as we look at this life of Joesph, we see that his brothers also obviously fought, but also that they were jealous of him. Now, maybe you don't have this in your family, but sometimes we have it in ours. Well, they got nicer shoes than I did. Oh my word, they were the same price. Well, their clothes look different than mine. They got one extra piece of candy and I didn't. Like, oh my word, kids. Open the junk drawer. There's Tootsie Rolls in there. Eat them. I don't care. Maybe you don't have that. Or maybe your kids were just my favorite. They haven't pulled it too often, but, well, that's your favorite child. No, it's not. None of you are my favorites. My dog is my favorite. Because he doesn't talk back, and he will. When you call his name, he comes and he gives you licks and kisses, and he chills with you. I can tell my dog to lay down; he'll sit right there and chill. The boys will tell him, "Hey, go lay down," and they're like, "Well, I have to lay down." I'm like, "Because I'm tired. I need a nap. So you need a nap too." Maybe that's not you, but we see this happening in the story of Joesph. So Joesph had a bunch of brothers. Joesph, his dad, took a liking to him more because he, at the time, was one of the youngest. Joesph had this beautiful coat. The dad made this beautiful, colorful coat for him. Gorgeous. The other brothers are in there, like, in the sackcloth, and he has this, like, prized coat. Joesph told his brothers, mistakenly, that I had this dream, and you all are going to bow down to me. I know if my youngest said that, the other two would look at him and be like, yeah, okay. I know if my youngest brother said that, I would have laughed in his face and be like, let's see you try to make me. For those that have not seen my family, my brothers are a lot smaller. We have fun in that. But Joesph was this child that the dad loved, it seemed like, more. So his brothers got angry. His brothers got so angry that maybe you've never experienced this, but maybe you've never experienced getting so angry with your sibling to where you're like, I just want to get rid of them now, and I don't care what it takes. See, if we look at the book of Genesis, we see in Genesis chapter 37 that Joseph's brothers are so angry with him that Joseph goes out to find his brothers, and they're out in this field, and they say, oh, look, here comes the dreamer. Genesis 37, they say, here comes the dreamer, and they want to get rid of him. So one of the brothers, I'm guessing he's the oldest, because this sounds like an older brother thing, would be like, he says, hey, let's kill the dreamer. Pretty bold statement. And they have this plan, and they're planning ahead to kill Joesph, to get rid of him forever. So that the dad now is like, oh, who's my next favorite, right? Like, because that's how it works in families, right? The immaturity of kids. It's great. But we see one of his brothers step up. Verse 21 says, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Do not shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, Reuben said. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. It's funny to me because Reuben, I'm sure, is like, man, I kind of like this kid. I don't know why, but he's kind of, he's my brother. I gotta love him. He's kind of cool, I guess. So Reuben is creating this big old plan. Throw him in this cistern. Now, a cistern was essentially just this big old hole. Throw him into this hole, and Reuben in his mind was like, hey, I'll come back after they're all gone, and I'll rescue him, pull him out, take him back to dad. Everything will be great. Then I'll be the favorite because I rescued his prized son. And what we see here is Reuben had this great plan, but God had other plans. See, my first point is this, that Joesph is protected and he's led by God. Verse 28 says, so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joesph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. So we see God here orchestrates these people to come. And these boys have a change of heart. Instead of just throwing them in there and letting them just chill and die there, God has our plan to where they're like, let's sell him for money, and let's take the money and enjoy it. And we'll just, tell dad that he got killed by a wolf or something, or, that some animal came and devoured him, and we'll put some blood on the thing so it looks legit. So God sent these people to come, and Joesph gets bought for a small price. And then what we see in verse 36, it says, meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joesph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So now this slave boy has changed hands twice. Now he is getting sold twice, and they sold him to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's officials. Now it's interesting, they said the captain of the guard. The fact that he was sold to Potiphar and that he's called the captain of guard, his position seems to have been that the chief executioner. Whew. That's who Joesph got sold to. He was like the head of Pharaoh's secret police. He was responsible for protecting his boss and for dealing with those who dared to attack Pharaoh. Potiphar, by virtue of his position, would have been in contact with many of the dignitaries and political officials of Egypt. It is not outside the realm of possibilities that Joesph would have been introduced to many of the influential people who would later serve him. Now, why does that matter? So he's getting sent to this dude who is literally like a mercenary. That's the word I'm looking for. Like he kills people. But he also protects Pharaoh at all costs. He's loyal. Potiphar is like, man, I am loyal to Pharaoh. Anybody that tries to attack him, they go through me. It's like the Detroit Lions offensive line. You want to get Goff? You better put Penei Sewell on his butt and try to run through him. They have their protection locked down. They say, come on, So Potiphar, that's him. So we can see how much control the Lord has by looking at the actions of the people involved. Joseph's brothers, the Ishmaelite traders, and Potiphar were all serving their own selfish ambitions. His brothers sold him because they wanted to get rid of him. And they wanted a little bit of money. The Ishmaelites sold him because, well, let's be real here. What are they going to do with him? So now we have Potiphar who bought this little boy because what else? Potiphar needs people to work with him. All right, well, hey, this is our job. If you get killed, I'll just go buy someone else. That's the reality of Joesph at this point. But we see that God has a greater purpose in this whole thing. So we see Joesph in Potiphar, in this house. We see him being groomed, being taught, coming into contact with these highly prized people. We see Joesph starting to notice what the Lord's doing in his life. Flip with me, if you have your Bibles, to Genesis chapter 39. Some of you are like, man, we are jumping around. Yes, we are. We got a lot to cover today. Genesis 39. Yes. Come on now. That's going to read it a lot better than I can. Genesis 39, verse 1. It says, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joesph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of this Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joesph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his whole household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joesph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joesph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So what we see here is point number 2. That through it all, God made him prosper. You see, God had this great plan for Joesph to come into Potiphar's house and to bless Joesph and then to bless Potiphar if he would honor the Lord's blessing. So Joesph now finds himself in charge of everything in the house of Potiphar. His sheep, his herds, everything. Nothing goes through without Joesph touching it. And what happens? The Lord blesses it. Joesph prospered because God blessed him. Joesph prospered because he saw in Joesph a man that he could trust to do his will. What some call luck in a person's life may have nothing more than the manifestation of a godly character. I'm going to say that again. What other people may call luck in this life is nothing more than a manifestation of a godly character. When we honor God, when we do His will, we prosper. We see the Lord's hand at work in our lives. You see, when we look to Jesus and we look to God and say, okay, this may not be the best thing for me, but if it grows your kingdom, let's do it. This may not be convenient for me, but if it's for your glory, let's do it. Maybe this may be hard for me. Maybe I'm going through some hardship. But if it grows your kingdom, God, I'm willing to go through it. This past week, Miranda and I had the opportunity to go down to Grand Rapids for a conference called 41 Hours. It has the Great Lakes region of the Wesleyan Church puts it on every year for pastors. And it's a time to refresh and refuel. That's their tagline. Refresh, refuel. It's great. We love it. We got to sit with a bunch of friends and people that we don't get to see often. And we also got to watch the Lions, which, come on now, it's a big win Monday night. But as we're sitting there, we continued to hear this thing spoken continually of just allowing for the Lord to work when it's not convenient, when it hurts. To allow for the Lord to, and you're like, well, that's basic. We all know it. It is, but mind you, like, this is a room full of pastors, and this is what we're talking about. And I found it interesting because why? Because oftentimes as humans, we're like, I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to get uncomfortable. I like to work out. I know it doesn't show. I haven't worked out in a couple months. It's okay. We're getting there. But in order to build muscle, you got to break it down. You got to get uncomfortable. You got to train to failure. You got to, in order to get stronger and bigger and better, the old school lifting bigger, faster, stronger that we all went through. I don't know, maybe you guys didn't in high school. But in order to get there, you have to train. You have to be obedient. You have to be disciplined, even when you don't want to. I love training legs. I have bad knees now. So squatting hurts my legs. But I have to be disciplined in squatting in order to keep my leg strength up. I hate running. It shows. I'm okay with it. But I have to be disciplined to keep my cardiovascular health in check, to keep my heart pumping. There's an old joke, hey, like, you train every other muscle to failure, why not train your heart to failure, right? And some of you will get that later. It's okay. Like I said, some of you will get it later. But we have to train. We have to continue to work it out. And what I'm getting at is this. Even when it's inconvenient with us, we have to continue to do the Lord's will. Even when it hurts, when it costs us something, we have to continue to do the Lord's will. Now, the Lord saw Joseph's character. The Lord saw who Joesph was, that he would do his will no matter what, that he would be obedient to him no matter what. And that comes at a price. And we see later on that Joesph, it happens right in Genesis chapter 40. It says, now Joesph was well built and handsome. I'm sorry, this continues in 39, my bad. Now Joesph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joesph and said, come to bed with me. Joesph was a beautiful, gorgeous man. Flowing locks, tall, dark, and handsome. Probably cut, ripped, like every lady's dream hunk. Like Justin Bieber. I don't know, who is it now? Jason Kelsey? Like, who? She's like, I'm not going to say a name because my dad's going to make fun of me. But Joesph was this hunk of a man. But remember, he has character. So verse 8, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in this house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do such a wicked thing and sin against my God? And though she spoke to Joesph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her and to even be with her. I'm going to pause there because in our society today, that, one, is not the norm. But two, in our society today, that's what people value. People want that stuff. Longing after people. We see it all over. We see it in the church world. Can we be real here? How many pastors have failed lately in the last couple years? Because of allegations or because of stuff that they've been doing privately. Nobody was around. Just her and Joe. Her and Joesph chilling, hanging out. And he's like, no, I'm a man of character. Why would I sin against God? Now it continues on. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties. And none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. See, it's interesting to me because Joesph, he had it all. This lady wanted him. But he stood on his character. And in fact, he left his cloak in her hand, which I found interesting because what happens next is she sets him up. She sets him up to where she goes to her husband and says, "Look, your little servant boy did this." And when he saw that the maid came in, then he ran out, but he left his cloak. Joseph's character cost him everything. He got thrown into prison, got thrown into the jail, and literally it was in the dungeon, bottom of the house, dark, damp, musty, stinky. Like, if you've been in a Michigan basement, you probably know what I'm talking about, but just think a lot worse. That's where he spent some of his time. But remember, he's a person of character, and God blesses those who obey him. So when the world persecuted him, when the world pushed him aside, when Potiphar said, "I don't trust in this, get out of here, get out of my sight, I'm going to strip you of everything," he's now down in the cellar, and what happens? God continues to use him. He's down there, and this person sitting there, and they're like, "Hey, I have this dream," and Joseph's like, "Let me help you." And God continued to use him. God then brings him back. God brings him back to his original standing and then some. Genesis 41 says, so now I'm gonna pause. So Pharaoh had this dream. And he's like, what does this mean? Why are the 7 lame, dead, sickly looking animals eating up the healthy looking ones? Nobody can make sense of it. And at that time, they were bringing magicians and people who were like dream people who could understand it. And they're like, it doesn't make sense to us. We don't know. But this dude remembers Joesph down in the basement in the cellar. He interpreted my dream. I wonder if he can interpret yours, Pharaoh. So he brings Joesph up, and Joesph has to shave. He has to change his clothes, get all pretty, do his hair. He gets up there, and he interprets the dream and says, this is what it means. We're going to have 7 phenomenal years. 7 great years. We're going to harvest more than we can contain. And there's going to be a great famine. All over the land. And as a Pharaoh, that's kind of concerning because people are going to look to you as a government official and be like, inflation's up. Can't afford my grain. Can't feed my sheep. Can't feed my cows. I can't eat. I'm starving. What are you going to do about it? But once again, God has a plan. So Joesph tells Pharaoh this, and now Genesis 41. So Pharaoh said to Joesph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, and he put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. See, Pharaoh took Joesph from a slave boy in a dungeon, waiting to essentially die. God blessed Joesph again. And the third point today is this, that through his faithfulness, God promoted him. See, God didn't just take him from Potiphar's house, but he took him to Pharaoh's house. God took him from just over this one little household to over the whole land. God blessed Joseph's faithfulness, his obedience, his courage, his strength, his character. Because he saw in Joesph a man that would do his will. We continue on the story and we see later on that Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery came hungry, waiting for food. The dad sent them. They came and they're like, hey, we need food. Our father's old. We need food. And Joesph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him because he was using a translator. Someone that, he's like, I'm not going to let them know it's me. And he sets a trap. And I love Joesph. I love him. He sets this trap for his brothers. And then he says, hey, everybody else go, but stay. One of you has to stay. And they're like, no, our dad's going to be mad. Long story short, Joesph continues this thing to where eventually he comes to a point to where he can no longer contain himself. He comes in, he comes clean to his brothers. He says, hey, I am your brother Joesph, the one that you thought was dead, the one that you sold. That's me. Now imagine with me if you're the brothers, what would your reaction be? I'm sure it wasn't, oh, thank you, Jesus. I love you so much. I'm sure it's, oh, snap. This boy has power. He's going to get revenge. And Joesph had all the right to be angry, mad, hurt. I mean, he got thrown into jail. He got sold twice. He had every reason to be mad, get revenge, but what did he do? Forgave them. Wrapped his arms around them, hugged them, kissed them. In that culture, it's normal. He loved on them. Moved his whole family to be closer to him. Blessed them. He didn't curse them. He blessed them. See, today I end with this. Will your faithfulness show through? When people look at you, are they looking at you and saying, that's a guy who's faithful to God's calling on their life? That's a guy or lady who is faithful to what the Lord is telling them to do. That is a person of godly character. Not just character, godly character. See, this is where pastors get off the wagon here. And they get off on, if you do this, God will give you all this. I'm not going to tell you that. The reality is listen, the Christian life is hard. We all know that. We've walked through it. But at the end of the day, our prize is heaven. If we're faithful, we're obedient. We see God work. It says in the Scripture, I'm going to work everything out for the good of my people. May not be good for us. I imagine for Joesph, it wasn't good when he's getting sold. Like, how is this going to be good? How's it going to be good when I'm in this dungeon? How's it going to be good when I have to resist all these things? I'm sure there was a point where Joesph looked up and said, God of my father, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, where? Why? How? How is this good? And what happens? God worked it all out. See, Joesph lives a prosperous life. He lives a life that's blessed by God. Blessings look different in every season for us. So the question to you today is, are you willing to be obedient when things get tough? Are you willing to be obedient when God is leading you down a direction that maybe you look at and you say, how? Why would this be good, God? Why would you call me to do these things? Why would you call me to forgive these people? Because it's hard to forgive. Why would you call me to do that? Why would you call me to walk this line of ministry? Why would you call me to be in this school when, let's be real here, school and children are hard. Parents are hard calling you, blaming you for all your kids, for all their kids' grades. Like, no, your kid didn't study, that's why he failed. Make your kid study. Will you be a person of godly character and stand up for what is right in the face of adversity?